the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Stephen Sakach here with my co-host, Mike Liwski, and I believe our guest is actually, I was told yesterday, this is going to be our 100th guest on the show. We've done 200 plus shows, so perfectly planned. It wasn't by accident at all. But we're happy to have Raj here as our 100th guest. But let me start with this stat. 3 out of 4 employees say they want to work for a company that balances profit with purpose. Yet fewer than 1 in 4 believe their employer truly does. So that kind of tells us something profound about how disconnected business can become from a deeper human purpose. And today's episode invites us to examine what it means to build organizations that heal, inspire, and uplift, and where profit can become the outcome of purpose and not just the opposite of it. Mike, tell us a little bit more about our guest and how he's shaped this global conversation around conscious capitalism.
My goodness, Stephen, where do I start? We are super delighted and honored to have Raj Sisodia with us. We have him listed here as the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism. I was going through that and said, man, he's one of the fathers of conscious capitalism, and so we're so pleased to have him. He's also the author of a number of books, right? Firms of Endearment, being one of the most influential books, redefining really purpose of business. And then also in Raj's work, he's inspired really this global movement that's focused on leading with love, purpose, and humanity. Really, it's at the center. It should be at the center of commerce. And as well, for those who may not be familiar with conscious capitalism, it has reshaped how organizations think about value creation. As well, Raj is currently the PHMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and the chair of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Right? You didn't know I spoke Spanish, did you? And he has served as the F.W. Olin Distinguished Professor of Global Business at Babson College, and as well has co-authored other books like Conscious Capitalism with John Mackey, The Healing Organization, Everybody Matters, and Awaken. Just to give it a small summary, really. So, Raj, we are so honored to have you on the Bliss Business Podcast today. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Michael and Stephen. It's a pleasure to be with you. How do you say no to bliss? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We're trying to spread that.
Hey, Raj, so you've spent kind of decades helping leaders rethink the definition of success. What first made you realize that the way we measure business performance was incomplete?
Well, so I've been a professor for 40 years, okay, believe it or not. You're supposed to say, wow, you don't look that old, but I am.
Wow, you don't look that old.
Did you start when you were 10?
And before that, I had 6 years of business education. And now as I look back, I'm at the stage of life where you look back as much as you also look forward. But, I realized in those 6 years of business education, it was all about the head and the wallet. Right? I think you would agree with that, right? Most business conversations are about the head and the wallet. The numbers, the theories, the frameworks, strategies, etc., and everything has to go to the bottom line. And what I've realized in hindsight is that I was never inspired during my business education, and I was never emotionally touched by what I was learning. So my heart and my spirit, my soul were bypassed completely as we make the journey from the head to the wallet. And I realized that is something that was a big, big loss, because as human beings, I think everything that we do should engage our hearts and should engage our spirit. We should be inspired and uplifted by what it is that we're doing and dedicating this precious life to, and our emotions should not be shut off from that. And I had the distinct experience when I was writing the book you mentioned, Michael, Firms of Endearment, which was kind of my awakening and connecting to my purpose and elevating my consciousness, that I was literally in tears as I was writing parts of that book, some of the stories. And I was shocked at myself. I said, what am I crying for? I've never cried. I haven't cried for 20 years. And now I'm crying because I'm writing about what UPS did for the family of one of its drivers who died on the job and so forth. And I realized that this was a missing piece. And in that moment, I knew this is what I want to do the rest of my life. This is the story of business that I want to tell. I want to understand it first more deeply. Business built on love and purpose, not just profit and winning, as so-called. And how do we do that? And how do we spread that in the world?
Yeah,
and
I think,
we are so glad you did.
yeah. And you mentioned UPS, and kind of bringing back to that thought, like they have the sort of the triple bottom line, I think, right approach, which really that does help us redefine success. At least one of the first things you can do is like, hey, we're always just measuring profit. Why not measure these other areas, right? Is that maybe one of the first areas you would maybe encourage a business to start with, is measuring something?
Yes. I say toward the end of my talk nowadays that you have to have, there's a multifaceted case that has to be made for everything that you do, right? So there has to be a human case. Well, what is it doing to our people? What's it doing to the health and well-being of our employees? The data, I think some of which you mentioned at the top, most people are disengaged. I think 75% of people are disengaged from their work. 7 out of 8 feel their work for a company doesn't care about them as a human. Levels of burnout are epidemic in many sectors of society. We have data like heart attacks being 20% higher on Mondays, that 120,000 Americans die from stress connected to work every year, that 600,000 Chinese die from too much work, right? So what's the human side of this? What is the impact we're having not only on our employees, but on their families? The children of our employees are stakeholders in our company, whether we acknowledge that or not, because, how their parents experience life during their work hours definitely impacts them in terms of how can they be at home, and certainly impacts their longevity and their well-being, right? Our customers, what are we doing for our customers? Many of us, many industries, we're selling things aggressively, cleverly, marketing things that we know are not good for people. We're getting people hooked. I think 70% of our calories are now highly, not just processed, but ultra processed foods, right? So we're getting people addicted and using a lot of cutting edge science to do so, right? So what are we doing to the health and well-being and the quality of life of our customers? So there has to be a human case. What we do has to be better for the physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual well-being of all of the lives that we touch. There has to be a societal case. What we're doing is actually creating a more flourishing society around us, right? And then the fact is that, you look around the world today and there are many, many places why do we have populist leaders and all of that energy that's being released? Because the suffering is very real. People are struggling. The income, inequality has risen dramatically in the last 10, 15 years, and over the last 40, 50 years, but especially in the last 15 years, right? And there's a lot of unrest. We're starting to see these massive protests, and we see countries like Chile that went from extremely business friendly to almost a socialist model. We see it in the US, 62% of young people now think socialism might be a better idea, or they have a favorable view of socialism relative to capitalism, and that's a dangerous thing because they have never experienced socialism. I did experience a version of that growing up in India in the 70s, but there has to be a societal case. We have to be better for the world. The world has to be better because we exist. Certainly there has to be a planetary case. We cannot be destroying the environment and destroying ecosystems. We're living through the 6th mass extinction in the history of this planet. And the first one that has occurred while human beings have been here. The last one was 75 million years ago. And species are disappearing at a rate 100 times faster than they would normally. Right, and all life is interconnected. So that's one aspect of it, right? Species, loss of nature, species extinction, climate change, many other dimensions, and a business case. So we need all of these working together. And what happens too often is we begin and we end with a business case. We can show a positive ROI on doing this versus not doing it. But what about the impact on the other 3? If we don't have all 4, I don't think we should allow ourselves to do anything that does not check all 4 of those boxes.
Yeah, and you end up having maybe like a negative planet business case, right? So Raj, maybe speaking a little bit more to some of the systems that some organizations more commonly work in, systems that are driven by maybe fear or scarcity, and then moving more towards one that is based on love and abundance. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. Like, what does that shift actually look like within the organization?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing is that many of us have been miseducated in a way. If we took an economics course, as many of us did, and then if you went to business school, that combination, it creates a very distorted view of what is a human being and what is life about. Right? Economics courses start with a set of foundational assumptions about what drives a human being. It's loosely known as Homo economicus, right? That we are all individualistic, materialistic, short-term value maximizers, right? That we look at everything and calculate what's in it for me. And that's what determines whether we do something or not, right? I believe that's a very, very narrow and corrupted view of a human being.
Sure.
Like money is the only game in town. There are many games in town that make life worth living, many things about life, right? So we are Homo sapiens. We're not Homo economicus. So yes, we are self-interested, but that doesn't mean we're selfish. Self-interest is a duty. We have to look after ourselves. Selfishness is not a virtue and should not be treated as such. In a way, we have done that in our theories. If everybody can be just as selfish as possible, our system will work because it's all based on self-interest. That's a distortion, right? Greed is good. That was the famous speech from the movie Wall Street. Greed is never good. Okay? Self-interest is fine. You have a duty to see to your own well-being, physical, mental, emotional, etc. But not greed. That's greed. That's a kind of addiction. It's a kind of sickness. You get that, But we are also incredibly cooperative as human beings, as Homo sapiens. We are purpose-driven, right? Not just driven by material things. We are rooted in the giving and receiving of love. That is fundamental to us. That gives our life meaning. That gives us joy, gives us bliss, right? And so, and we're altruistic as well. We do things without expecting anything in return, just because we're wired to care. That's who we are. So we have created this alternate reality in which we are actually, our understanding of who we are is tremendously distorted. And what happens, sadly, and I taught a doctoral seminar last semester on this, and we looked at the research on it, social science theories can become self-fulfilling. What does that mean? If I take an economics class, if I become an economics major, and I learn that this is what human beings are supposed to be according to those models, guess what? You end up becoming more selfish and more short-term oriented and more materialistic. Just because you had that education. You kind of become self-fulfilling. You fulfill those theories because you imbibe them and believe them to be true. But if you get a much richer understanding of human beings, you will lean into and live into that as well. So I think that's been a big part of the problem. So we've taken that idea of individuals being Homo economicus, immediately translates into, therefore, companies being a collection of individuals are simply a large-scale version of that, right? Profit maximization or shareholder value maximization. And I think that's a very narrow and very distorted view. Problem is that it's very hard, first of all, to get people to unlearn something that's so deeply embedded. It's like an operating system now. Yeah. And secondly, the people who are attracted to that mindset and to those majors and those professions ultimately also have an overweighting on money and power. Right? They believe success and happiness equals money and power, and therefore getting as much as possible. And so we've got a lot of people who've done very well by those two criteria. They've accumulated money and power. But meanwhile, their businesses are sources of suffering for the people who work there, for the people who they serve, the communities, the planet, etc. But they don't see the problem. And I've experienced this multiple times with highly successful, highly paid CEOs who don't see the problem, right? They say that you will see it when you believe it, right? But when you don't see, you don't want to be, there's another expression, I forget, it comes from, I forget that famous book, but he says, you cannot get a man to believe in something if his salary depends on him not believing it. Okay. So whatever evidence you can present. So a lot of people are stuck in that mode. And I think that's part of the awakening that we try to do and the consciousness elevation. But there's no systematic way to do that. It's not just about the head. As I said, it has to touch you deeply. Yeah. And you have to go through a kind of a transformation. It's like the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Happens automatically in nature because nature turns on the cell. We human beings are in charge of our own mutation. We have to willingly go through the transformation. We have to want to go through the transformation. So I think that is part of the challenge that we face here, that people don't see it at that level, right? They're still operating at that survival, or not just survival, but, sort of materialistic, narrow self-oriented view. And what we want to do is to awaken them to their higher possibilities.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you talked about, Yeah, the thing is, the way we grow and mature as human beings is our ability to take on more perspectives and become more empathetic.
Yeah.
And so you're hoping that business is going to follow that at some point, but right now, trying to get it there, I mean, we're dragging businesses kicking and screaming along with us, right?
Yeah. No, I
Because
think, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, well, it's just, I think business is going to follow consciousness, eventually. What we're talking about here is really the future of business, I think it's inevitable, but we've got all these sort of systems and things working against us right now that are kind of sucking the soul and the life out of what we do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there are obstacles. The mental models is one thing, the Wall Street and the whole structure of finance and all of that is another. But I think ultimately those are impediments, but they're not walls. There are plenty of companies that operate despite that. Even public companies are able to do that. But it requires us to rethink what is business. I mean, go back to fundamentals. What is business? In a free society like ours, governments are not supposed to take care of us, right? Our needs are met. In the old days, people used to meet all their own needs, right? They grew their own food and they made their own shoes or whatever. But now in a market economy, we are given the opportunity to serve each other, to take care of needs in a certain dimension of our lives, right? So if we think about business as a way for us to take care of each other and meet each other's needs. So if I think of business as a way to express myself, in other words, what is my passion? What do I love to do? What am I great at? I use that, express myself, and I use that to serve others.
Yeah.
Okay, that becomes a healing business. That becomes a loving business. I'm expressing myself and I'm serving others. But if I start out with the idea that I'm going to use all these other people to serve me, right? I want to figure out, what not only what they need, but what I can get them to desire and get them addicted to, etc., and then use all of that to fill my ego, right? And hunger for power and money. That same business could be the same product, same industry, but it becomes a source of suffering because now you're using people. Right, and you're not doing it from a place of service. So if I think of business as a way for us to scale love and care into the world. It's our expression. In my normal life, I can only touch so many lives and I can only care for so many lives. If I start a company, I can multiply that by 10, 100,000, even more than that, right? So I think it's the energy with which we approach the whole idea of business. Business can be beautiful. We say business can be noble, heroic, right? Transformative, beautiful, when we do it in that way. Otherwise, it just becomes, it's kind of a mercenary activity. We just do it to make money.
At all costs.
Yeah. So picture I've got kind of my standard sort of soulless business, what kind of systems or structures do you think we need to put in place to allow conscious capitalism to scale and bring back that soul into business, or bring back that, make it more of a living organism?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. And I feel like we have a live case study of that in Microsoft, over the last decade under Satya Nadella. So look at the history of Microsoft. Bill Gates, CEO for 14 years when it became public, right? 86 to 2000. And it had a kind of soul at that time. It had a vision, a computer on every desk, right? A bold vision that he had. It was a very aggressive culture, kind of an arrogant culture, right? Because of Bill Gates. The personality of the CEO kind of becomes the culture of the organization. So very smart, but in a single dimension, right? Software.
Yeah.
Very arrogant in that regard. And if we didn't like what you proposed or came to his office, he's like, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Don't ever come back to me with anything like that. Everybody becomes a mini-me of Bill, But it worked. In traditional terms, they became a major player, a significant company in the world, and was the second most valuable company in the world at the time that he stepped down, $250 billion. GE was number one. Now comes Balmer. Now Balmer didn't have a vision, didn't have a purpose. And the original purpose had already been achieved in a way, right? There was a computer pretty much on every desk of every white-collar professional by the year 2000. And so there was no purpose, and he didn't replace it. He didn't come up with a new inspiring purpose, so that's gone. He wasn't very good on the technology or the strategy. Right? He's a business school guy, right? And all he was looking at was the verticals and how can we increase the profit. Every profit center just has to keep performing. Now they already had 95% market share in operating systems and 95% in applications. So how do you grow from there? But basically 14 years of treading water under his lead. They missed the whole iPhone explosion, the smartphone explosion.
Right.
They missed the whole shift towards cloud and all of those kinds of things that was going on, right? And in 14 years, he increased the market really by 20%, right? Which is way behind what the market was. And then along comes Satya Nadella in 2014, and he looks at a company that's kind of dying. It's lost its soul, if it ever had one. It's a threatened kingdom. It just feels everybody's kind of dispirited. And does the world even need Microsoft anymore? Like, why do we even exist, right? And then he comes in and he said, okay, what is my role here? He saw it as refounding this company, giving it a next new birth in a way. Come up with a compelling new purpose, which is about empowering everybody in the world to do more with these technologies, right? To not just having a computer on your desk, but what do you do with it? Very significantly created a culture of empathy. Now, you never associated the word empathy with Microsoft before that. Okay, Barma was left to yell and jump and scream, and he was like a maniac. But Satya had a special needs child, and he had gone through all kinds of personal challenges. Even his daughter has issues, so he had developed a lot of empathy as a father, and he brought that into his work, and he started creating that culture with his leadership team, talking about challenges in your life and so forth, and then a growth mindset. In a very arrogant culture of a bunch of know-it-alls, in a fast-moving technological environment, you can't be a know-it-all. You have to be a learn-it-all, right? So creating that growth kind of mindset in the company. And of course, he's very savvy technologically and strategically as well. So you look at the company now, Microsoft is close to 4 trillion now, okay? From 300 billion in 10 years, he's taken it, I think it's number 1, number 2, right? Between Microsoft and Apple there, and now NVIDIA, of course. But you look at the extraordinary amount of financial value creation that has happened under his leadership. All the while, he's not talking about shareholder value, etc., as being the driver. He's talking about, having a great empathetic company that does very, things that people care about.
Yeah.
So I think that is what that says is that you need a leader to really, build a soul in a company. Your company itself is an inanimate object, right? But you have that founding energy that kind of gives that company its soul in a way. And many companies have it in the beginning and then they lose it. Walmart had it under Sam Walton. They had a reason for being. There was respect for the ordinary, ordinary people living in these little towns who couldn't afford to buy necessities because the prices were so high. So there was a reason why Walmart came into being. And then when he died, they kind of lost their soul and became a soulless cost-cutting machine. Right? Squeeze your employees, get them on food stamps if you need to, squeeze your suppliers, do all of that. And I think in the last decade or so, they've kind of reconnected to their founding energy. And why do we exist? Why does the world need Walmart? How are we a force for good in this world? So I think that can happen. You can have a soul and lose it and then get it back, or you can kind of be soulless and then have a leader who comes in, who kind of brings that energy, right, and creates that. And that opportunity exists for every company. Okay, don't matter what your history is. Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can always do a reset and start building today, but it takes a leader with a consciousness, and it takes a leader with that vision and the qualities that you want to see.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there, just like narrowing it down to a couple of points, was focus on a purpose that's inspiring and not just the single shareholder value or something that doesn't inspire anybody, right? More conscious purpose.
Right.
And then really what I think that we say a lot is you kind of audit your business toward that purpose, or audit your business according to love or empathy, right? Go through, just iterate, keep asking that question, how we can do something loving here or more empathetic here. And then you kind of rally around that. I think that's kind of what if you step back and look at it, right? With Microsoft.
Yeah, essentially. So what I say is that every great purpose is a healing purpose. And what do I mean by that? Are we part of reducing suffering in the world in some way? And are we part of bringing more joy into the world? All right, so look at our purpose with that lens. And then healing stands for the qualities. I have a thing for acronyms, just like Bliss.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's the latest acronym, Raj? I think.
Well, you don't want to get me started. Uh, but healing is my acronym for the qualities of a great purpose. It has to be heroic.
Yeah.
When you envision the idea of a computer on every desk at a time when computers existed in a big room somewhere and cost millions of dollars, right? It's pretty heroic. When Henry Ford said, I want a car that, for the vast multitudes, that my workers should be able to drive home in a car, that sounded crazy, right? So a heroic purpose that is going to stretch you and is going to make a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs said, right? It's evolutionary. It evolves as you evolve and the world changes. It aligns all your stakeholders together. This is where the two pillars, purpose and stakeholders, come together, right? Because your stakeholders have, as you said earlier, all have to care about that purpose, not just your employees, not just your executives. Customers need to care about it. Investors need to care about it. That's what they're investing in, right? This vision and this purpose that you've created for the world. Your suppliers, everybody, employees especially, have to believe in your purpose. So it aligns everybody together. If you don't have a shared purpose, the default purpose is to maximize profit. And therefore, everybody becomes a profit maximizer. Customers want the lowest price. Employees want the highest pay, least amount of work. Suppliers want the highest margin. Society wants the highest taxes, because everybody says, how much can I take from this system? As opposed to when you have shared purpose and shared values, everybody says, how can I enable this thing to thrive? Even customers, employers, supply, everybody wants this entity to thrive, right? So it aligns everybody together. It's loving. L is for love. It is an expression of your love into the world. What is love? The unconditional desire for the well-being of others. And a company that operates in this way is elevating people's lives, employees' lives, customers, communities, etc. It's an expression of, it's inspiring, it's natural, it's in harmony with nature, and it's galvanizing. It gets you excited to go to work on Monday, right? So when you have a purpose like that, then you start to think about all of your stakeholders, not only that they're aligned with the purpose, but how do I create value in a deeper way for them? Just like for employees, right? Their experience of your company can be, it's just a job. I'm here for these hours, then I get to go home, right? Or it's a career, right? I do more than the basic minimum not to get fired, so that there's a trajectory for me here. Or it's a calling. I am here because I passionately love what I do. And I believe in what this company is trying to do. If I win the lottery Friday afternoon and I never have to work again, I still show up Monday morning, because my work has meaning beyond the paycheck. That's what we want, right? Even if I didn't pay you, would you still do this work if you didn't need the money? Yes, because this is who I am, right? This is an expression of me into the world. So we want to create that for all of our stakeholders, a reason for connecting with this enterprise because they passionately believe in it. And that releases so much energy and so much creativity in the system. That's why, in my research firms of Endearment, when we found companies that were loved by everybody, and there's a long story as to how that book developed. But we discovered the 4 pillars of conscious capitalism. What makes a company loved is that they are rooted in purpose, a higher purpose. They care about the well-being of all of their stakeholders. They have conscious leaders who care about the people and the purpose, and they're not just about power and money and their ego. And we have a caring culture where people love going to work. They don't say, thank God it's Friday, I'm out of here, and oh God, it's Monday. They love going to work because it's exciting and it's fun. And what I say is that love and work and play are what defines a human being. And why can't we combine these 3 things? Why can't we love what we do, love the people we work with and the people we serve? And why can't we have fun doing it? Why do we have to say love belongs at home and work is you put on your mask and armor and you come here and you do battle with our competitors in the marketplace, and then play is what you do on the weekends, right? Why can't we combine these things? And I found at the end of my research, having found 28 companies that fit that mold in the original firms of Endearment, 18 public companies, I looked at the financial performance over a 10-year, 5-year, 3-year period. And it shocked me to find that these companies had outperformed the market by 9-1 over 10 years compared to the S&P 500. Even though they're not trying to maximize profit, they generate far more profit and shareholder value. And that was a bit of a shock. And now we've said, how is that possible? They're paying their people much better. The frontline people like Costco is paying double of Walmart. They're providing much better benefits to their employees like healthcare. They're investing in the customer experience. They're paying their suppliers well. They're investing in their local communities. They're investing in mitigating the environmental damage that they do. And yet they're making more money for shareholders because they create so much more value in that system. And they save money on marketing. Some of these companies have $0 They don't even have a chief marketing officer. They have much lower employee turnover. Walmart was 70% a year. Costco was just 7% a year. Right? Walmart had to hire 2 million people every year just to replace those who left. So the enormous cost of that.
Massive cost.
There's a reason why all of this works very well together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Raj, I think we have a question here from our audience. It's from a LinkedIn user. So Raj, do you think AI could play a role in helping organizations measure and align with their higher purpose? And maybe just before you answer that question, I think, Stephen and I, we've got a view on that. I mean, obviously creating an AI tool that at its core starts with purpose. But yeah, what do you see the opportunity as being here for AI and helping these organizations?
AI is a tool that depends on the consciousness of its user. And
I felt like you were going to say that.
What can I do? But who am I being when I use AI? So what am I trying to amplify into the world and go deeper in? Right? So when you ask those questions, I've actually got my own version of ChatGPT, one that I've created called the Conscious Enterprise Oracle. And it really does help you go far deeper on all the pillars, not just on purpose. Right? So you can go far deeper on the purpose, make sure that it's not only sounds good, but it's actually relevant for all of your stakeholders, and then develop what we call key purpose indicators, not just key performance indicators. So how do you know that you're tracking that? And how can we even customize it further to different customer groups and make sure that it matters to all of your stakeholders, right? Not just to customers. Many purposes are just customer focused, right? And employees don't have a reason to get excited about them. How can we have a purpose that actually everybody cares about? It even more so on the stakeholder side. How can we look at each of us? And my acronym there, by the way, is SPICY, okay, for stakeholders: society, partners, investors, customers, employees, and the environment. Right? So how do we create value at a deeper level for each of those? Right? And how do we align them together so that it's a win-win? You don't have to take away from one to benefit another. You get rid of the trade-off mentality.
Yeah, Raj, I think this is so important as we're getting into this world of AI. Just having worked in AI for, in the advertising side for over a decade plus. If we're optimizing and we're telling AI that this is our goal and it's going to have singular focus on that goal, and that goal is garbage to begin with, it's going to be doing garbage work. So if our singular goal is just profit, it doesn't care about people. It's not going to care about planet, right? It's going to optimize toward that profit. And so like you're saying, it's just really important, I think, that we have this foundational thinking within AI. And maybe not everyone's consciousness isn't there, but we need to get AI doing this. I think it's just,
and AI does a beautiful job. As I said, I've been using it. Now I'm playing with it. I use it in some of my teaching, my workshops that I do. And I get people to do an assessment of their own purpose. We have assessments that we do on each of the 4 pillars with 10 to 20 questions on each. And then I said, okay, now I'll put that assessment into the AI and say, okay, this is where I am today. How can I improve? What can I do? And this is what my business is, and so forth. I mean, it gives you a lot of great insights, as you know, having used it, right? So again, I think it's a powerful tool to amplify your intention in the world, just as you said. And if you intend to simply go down the old path, which is, I look at companies and they look profitable on paper, and I said, wait a minute, that's not real profit. That is false profit. Because you've made X number of dollars, but what have you done? You've squeezed your employees and shortened their lives and damaged their health. And you've impacted their children, you've damaged the environment, and you've made your customers obese and diabetic. And if you were to quantify all of that, you would be in a negative.
If we got the balance sheet for this,
the biggest cost, the human cost, doesn't show up on your income statement or balance sheet. What is the cost of 600,000 Chinese people dying every year from too much work?
Yeah.
And how does that show up in the price of made in China that you buy, and where's the real cost, right? So, that's not a real profit, and that's not therefore a real business. That's a parasite, because you're not creating value, you're sucking value out, right, from people, from the planet, and from other things. A real business creates a net positive impact on every life that it touches. That is the magic of business, right? The output can far exceed the inputs that we put into a business. That's why we have all this abundance around us, because of the power.
And for those out there, look up the definition of parasite and then think about your own business through that definition. Trust me. We got another audience question here. Let's go with that. Let's see. I would welcome a reflection on the current systemic pressures on publicly owned and traded companies to maintain a growing stock price for increasing shareholder value. What about how to handle the pressure of that systemic formula of ongoing consistent growth?
Yeah, no, that's a very real thing on public companies. I mean, I've seen it myself, of course, working with Whole Foods and other companies. Those pressures are real, but it takes a leader with the courage of his or her convictions to know that what they're doing is ultimately going to create value, right? And we have to have the courageous patience to stick with it. So I say two things on that. First of all, like a conscious company is still a business. A conscious business is still a business. It has to have a good strategy, an agile and well thought out strategy. It has to have a strong business model. It has to have efficient processes and all of the things that are sort of the nuts and bolts of business have to be in place. And then you add these elements of consciousness, the purpose, the stakeholder mindset, the leadership, and the culture, and then you're going to turbocharge it. But that cannot make up for the fact that you don't have a good business model or that you don't have a value proposition that works anymore in the market. Maybe it worked when you started, not working anymore. So we have to pay attention to both sides of that, right? The blocking and tackling aspects, the core aspects of the business, and then make sure that you also do the higher aspects of consciousness into that. What we say is that when you do all of those things well, when you have a good strategy and a good business model, and then you add all of these other elements onto that, you are going to create value over time. Okay, you will have lower employee turnover, you'll have higher employee engagement, you'll have more creativity and productivity, you'll have much higher customer loyalty, you'll have free word of mouth, positive marketing impact, right, from happy customers, you'll reduce your marketing spending. Lots of your legal costs are likely to go down because you don't sue people you trust. You probably won't have as high administrative costs because you don't need a lot of layers of management. So all of those things happen, and then that results in value creation. And that should show up, therefore, in the stock price. So you focus on doing the right things, and you trust that the outcomes will be there over time, okay? But you have to have a clear story that you tell. My favorite CEO in that regard was Jim Sinegal, who was the founder and longtime CEO of Costco. And now he's, I think, on the board, but he's no longer CEO. But Jim paid his people double of Walmart, double the prevailing wage that existed. And he got criticized by Wall Street all the time, saying, why are you paying your people double the prevailing wage? You know you can hire people for $10. Why are you paying them $22? You are stealing from the shareholders. They will literally use that language. That money belongs to the shareholders. Okay. And he would say, well, I believe that people should be able to look after their families and lead a decent life. And if you don't believe that, then please don't recommend my stock. And by the way, yes, we pay our people double, but our sales per employee are 3 times higher than Walmart's. And by the way, our annual turnover is 7% and theirs is 70%. Okay, so our labor cost is actually lower as a percentage of sales. So there's a rationale as to why it works when you operate in this way. You don't say, let's pay our people as little as possible. Our companies like HEB in Texas, their direction from the CEO is very clear. Please pay our people as much as possible. Create a business model that does not predicate it upon people living at a sub-poverty level or barely able to survive. They have to have not only a living wage, but a dignified wage and a pathway towards progress in the organization. So again, when you do these things right, it's a tricky thing, because when you are driven by a cherished outcome, as the Buddha said, and the cherished outcome in this case is a growth, right? You want 10% growth, or you want this share price, then you will engage in wrong actions in order to achieve that cherished outcomes. You will squeeze your people, you will squeeze your suppliers, you will announce a massive layoff because that has been shown to increase the share price. You will do a share buyback. That increases the share price, but it's not creating any more value, and it's starving your own company of investment that it may need for the future. You will achieve that cherished outcome in the short term, but you will have planted the seeds for really negative things to happen over time. Whereas if you just focus on the right actions, you will get the right outcomes over time. And that's what I think most of these conscious companies that do very well, they don't have those kinds of targets that we're going to increase our share price. We're going to do the right things, and we believe that creates so much more value that should show up in the stock price. Now, there could be external shocks, there could be pandemics, right? There could be, global financial crises, etc. Those times, that's out of our control, but we control what we can control and operate. But the very important thing is that we have to have a clear story and explain why our business model is the way it is and why we believe it works, right?
Yeah, you got to know, like someone said on the show, you got to know your hell yes, your hell no.
Yeah.
On this, right? Especially when it comes to your purpose. You mentioned Costco, and I think they're great at that, for sure.
Yeah. Man, Raj, we have so many questions to ask of you, but maybe we'll have to have you, come back on the show, because I wanted to ask, in terms of with leaders, do they really, how do they view, in your experience, purpose driven, right? There seems like there's a misconception there. I wanted to ask about how your marketing background and your views on.
Let's get a marketing question in there, Mike. We've got a former disgruntled marketer here. So.
Let's throw it in there. So I did want to ask, just kind of we were joking before the show about your background in marketing. How did your background, though, in marketing, would you say, informed your views of the human sides of capitalism, or the importance of purpose, any of that?
Yeah, well, I came from a country, India, at the time in the 70s, which was almost devoid of marketing. As I said, it's kind of a semi-socialist economy. Government controlled a lot of it. Marginal income tax was 97%. Government owned many industries, etc. Well, there was only 15 minutes of advertising per day on the one TV channel that existed. Okay. Then I lived in New York City in 1981, and oh my God, I just plunged into a tsunami. Right? It's like, oh, crazy Eddie on the TV screaming, our prices are insane. And the New York Times is 5 inches thick with coupons. And the little airplanes flying above with, ad behind them. And you stand at the urinal and there's a message right there. And I was, oh my God, this is like,
noise.
How much are we spending on this? So my question as a PhD student, and later on when I started teaching, was, what are we spending on marketing? Right? When we estimate that every average American gets 2,500 marketing related messages a day. That was the estimate. But 95% of them, they don't even notice, right? And 99% of coupons are never redeemed. And 95% of the direct mail goes into your trash can, hence the name junk mail. And so I started saying, my God, what are we spending on all of this? And what's the impact of all of it, right? And I did a study in the 2004, the image of marketing. And as part of that, we studied all of that. We found that the US, we were spending $1 trillion a year on ads, coupons, and junk mail that year, 2004. Now it's about 1.6 trillion, I believe. Now, that was more than the GDP of India that year. Just think about that. India had 1 billion people, okay? And they were living on less, $700 billion, and we were spending more than that for 300 million Americans on ads, coupons, and junk mail. On a per capita and a per family basis, that was more than the income of 85% of the world's population. Okay, are living on less than what we are spending on ads, coupons, and junk mail, most of which get unnoticed and is never even used, right? And I said, what is that doing for us? Is it making our life better? What is it doing for customers, for companies, and for society? And all my research led me to conclude that actually 85% of customers, 88% of customers do not trust marketing. If it is marketing, means it's not true. Have you heard that? That's just marketing.
Yeah,
right?
That's just marketing.
Now, imagine this. My father got a PhD in agriculture science. And my inner dialogue as a PhD in marketing was, he used to say my son is a professor of marketing, like he was quite amused. And my inner dialogue was that my father got a PhD in plant science because he wanted to cure world hunger. Literally, that was his dream, right? And I got a PhD in marketing. I'm just out here selling more junk to people who don't need it. I kind of had this lack of, self-respect, almost a sense of shame.
Yeah.
That what I'm doing is not inherently good for the world. The world doesn't necessarily need more marketers. If we had an incremental dollar to spend, we wouldn't put it towards marketing, right? We'd put it towards public health or education or something, right? And so I was hungry for some meaning and purpose without realizing it's because I was a very idealistic person growing up. I wanted the world to be a certain way. I wanted to have a positive impact. And I looked around and I said, wow, it's a pretty corrosive story of business, that we're telling. It's only about money. And look at all the negative impact on the environmental issues were starting to become well known at the time, and impact on people, impact on communities that were being abandoned as companies went in search of lower labor costs, all of those things. So I was very focused on the downsides of the traditional story of business. And I wrote for 10 years, I did academic research on that, showing everything that was broken, about marketing and about business in general. But then I had a question also, is there a better way? And that's important, because my mentor told me, Raj, we've written about the problem for 10 years. We should start writing about this. People want to know about the solution, So I said, is there a better way? And so that question, by the way, the answer is always yes. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're talking about perfection itself. There's still a better way.
Yeah.
Right? There's no limit to human ingenuity and creativity. And so that question that led me to the research that led to Firms of Endearment, that then led to conscious capitalism as a movement, right? Because we found a whole different philosophy and mindset. And like I said, I was writing some of the stories and I was in tears. And I said, my God, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and that was the beginning of my purpose journey in 2005 when I discovered that. And then I met John Mackey 2 years later, and then we decided to launch the movement, right? So I think that was my journey. And one of the things that I think about is to why we got here and how we got here. One of my books is about the integration of the masculine and the feminine. And I think that is a big element that explains a lot of this, right? We have had a lot of masculine energy in the world, especially in business and in government, right? The US had founding fathers, there were no founding mothers. Women were not allowed to vote, were not allowed to own property, and hence the healthy sort of the Enlightenment thinkers of the founding fathers were. Over time, that becomes unhealthy, and that becomes, the robber barons and domination and aggression and hyperwinning, and everything becomes a war. When you have only masculine energy and no feminine energy, everything becomes a war. Business becomes war, sports is war, war is war, right? Everything. War on cancer, war on drugs, war on terror, war on hunger, war on, we declare war.
Right.
That's what we do, right, as men. So what we need is that nurturing, caring, compassionate, empathetic, inclusive energy, right? And business is about us caring for each other. Ultimately, business needs to have mother energy in it as well. Yeah. And that's something that a coach told me the year I turned 60 when she'd heard the story of my life and my relationship with my father. She said, you spent 45 years trying to impress your father, your worldly success and, titles and money. And then you spend the last 15 years honoring your mother with your work. Then everything with Firms of Endearment, conscious capitalism, healing, Shakti leadership, everybody matters, awaken, and then my new book coming in January called Healing Leaders. It's all bringing that mother energy. That is so missing. We all come from a mother and a father, and yet we run after that father, the dreams of my father, that kind of idea. And I think that is deeply embedded in us because it goes back to the founding of this country and the founding of capitalism, which happened the same year, by the way, 1776, right? Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, and we wrote the Declaration of Independence. So that's one of those huge historic, convergences. But what happened in that process, Adam Smith had also written another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was about the human need to care. 17 years before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, which became the Bible for free markets, right? And how free markets work. So the way I say it is that capitalism had a mother and a father, and they were both Adam Smith. The mother energy was in moral sentiments, father energy was in Wealth of Nations. And what did we do? Just like we do in life, many of us, we take our mothers for granted. And we run after what our fathers are all about, right? I think that's what we have had. And now we're finally trying to bring that back in, right? Bring that feminine. Because all of us, it doesn't matter if you're CEO as a man or a woman. You can be a whole person. You can be tough-minded and tender-hearted, as Martin Luther King said, and we need to be. We need to be a whole person, not just half a person. I'm born with this gender for reproductive reasons, therefore I'm only limited to this set of things that I can. No, you can be equally caring as a man, and a woman can be equally strong and resilient, etc. So that's, I think, a big part of it is a journey to wholeness, because healing is another word for wholeness. We have to become whole. We are fragmented within ourselves, and we have to bring that to every part of our life, including politics, including business.
I love this because we started talking about marketing, and this gets to the conversations that our agency has with a lot of people as we really take this empathetic approach, and we really are trying to get them to come find out what their higher purpose is and what they're doing, and then let us tell an authentic story about that with them. Raj, so one question I get to ask on this show of CEOs and everything is some form of this, and we've talked about it all this show, but it's really just in one question: is what is the role of love in business?
It is very clear to me the role of love in life, and therefore in business as well. Every single thing we do in this life should come from love. Every action, every decision, everything that comes out of our mouth should be rooted in love. Not anger, not fear, not greed, not jealousy. I find a lot of business decisions come from fear and greed. Fear of the competition, fear of not being able to survive, and then greed more, right? We have a compulsion to grow. There's a compulsive energy. Why do we have compulsion? I say we should not operate growth from compulsion. Growth is an outcome of doing something right. And when you've got a beautiful business that heals and elevates and uplifts, is built on love and care, then you feel an obligation to grow because you're spreading a healing ministry through that business. That's why I wrote the Healing Organization, because those companies, they feel an obligation to grow, because once you've created something that works so beautifully, then why not do it for more people? You're not doing it from saying, I don't have enough zeros in my bank account. You're doing it because I haven't touched as many lives as I want to before I'm gone. So love, now this also came to me in some of my spiritual retreats and experiences, etc. I got a very powerful message that love, everything should come from love. It sounds rather trite, I know, but it doesn't make it any less true or fundamental. Everything should be rooted in love. And another message I got in one of those experiences was love that is not expressed is like a check that is never cashed. It doesn't do any good for anybody.
Yeah.
You could hold all the love in your heart for your mother or for somebody in this world, and you don't tell them, and you just assume that they know. They don't know. And you need to express that. That happened between me and my mother. After my coach told me that you've been honoring your mother with your work for 15 years, then she asked me, does your mother know that? And I said, well, I didn't know it until a minute ago. How would she know? She said, you need to call her and tell her that. And I said, oh, come on. We don't talk like that in my family. We talk about the weather. We talk about politics. We talk about how is your health. We don't talk about this kind of stuff. She said, no, you must call her. And so I did. And I told her, Mummy, I called her Mummy. I said, everything that I've done in this world that has made a difference to anybody is because of you.
Oh.
The world has enough of my father's energy. I mean, my father cut me off for 5 years and we had a difficult thing. The world is dying for is a lack of mother energy. And that's why we're killing our mother earth, planet. We are committing matricide because we don't have that mother energy, right? And she just started crying and saying, Raj, I'm nothing. I have her picture right here on my phone.
Yeah.
Beautiful spirit. And it became the most healing conversation for her and for me, because she thought her life had not been worth anything. Because, she wasn't a famous scientist like my father. He didn't even speak English. But yeah, the fact is she just loved unconditionally. And that has made all the difference, to not only us, but everybody whose life she touched.
Yeah. What an amazing influence. And I hope, Raj, you get to tell her story even more. And what a great coach you have as well there, for sure. My mom, not that I believe in hell, but she would always say, hell is full of good intentions, to your point, right?
Right.
Of those uncashed checks. So
sure.
Yeah, Raj, this has been, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a couple of things. Today actually is the launch of a book called Everybody Matters, the second edition. It's a 10th anniversary edition of a book called Everybody Matters that I wrote with Bob Chapman, revised and expanded. So this is the story of a leader who had a series of awakenings and transformations, running an industrial manufacturing company, which was losing money. And then he had all these awakenings and started to put people at the center and treat everybody like family. And it's all about love and treating everybody as somebody's precious child and measuring success by the way we touch the lives of people. Not only turned around his own company, he has now bought nearly 150 other companies.
Wow.
And turned them all around. They're thriving, and he never sold a single company. He says, we don't buy companies, we adopt them. So it's a very, very uplifting and very practical story of how do you do this, in a real way. And then my new book is called Healing Leaders. It's coming out in January, 7 Steps to Recovery of Self. And that's also something that happened to me when I turned 60. Along with that coach, I had a silent retreat. And in that silence, for 3 days, I received so many downloads of what life is about and what my life is about. And so these 7 steps that came to me: know yourself. You have to know who you are, right? Of 117 billion humans who ever existed. Love yourself. Many of us don't love ourselves, even if we think we know ourselves, because we have all this messaging and programming, right? Many of us, 80 to 90% of people do not love themselves. Be yourself. Be authentic to who you are. Don't try to act like somebody that you are not. You're here to play your role. There's a thing that somebody says, praying to God, I want God, make me like Abraham. And he said, I already have Abraham. I need you. So we need each of us, right? Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, choose yourself, everything that happened in your life. Don't be a victim of what you think were the bad, so-called bad things. You have to something that's to be learned, and you grow from every one of those. Express yourself, your purpose, your hero's journey. Complete yourself, which is become whole, masculine, feminine, elder, child within you. Become the wise fool of tough love, the wisdom of the elder, the foolishness of the child, the toughness of the masculine, the love of the feminine. And then heal yourself, which is heal your wounds and traumas, your psychic wounds and traumas. All of us carry them. Most of us don't acknowledge them. And therefore, we're not in charge of our own behavior and our own, what we say and what we do, because there's a trauma that is causing us to do things, right? So if we heal ourselves, then we can become a gift to others. We can become a source of healing in the world. So that's what's coming in January.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that last one is so important for leaders out there too, because you do have a ripple effect on people.
So the title has two meanings: healing the leader, and therefore becoming a healing leader for others. Right. So, but if you don't heal yourself, you will cause suffering in the world for others.
Can't heal others.
Raj, thank you. I probably wanted to say amen about 100 times during the show, for sure. But thank you for having us, or thank you for coming on the show with us. And thank you to our audience for listening in. And thank you, Mom. Love you. And we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.